Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I have Maria with me today, and we're going to be talking about, if you can't catch it from her little title tag there, empathy in the workplace. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I am Maria Ross. I'm a speaker, an author, a leadership trainer, and an empathy advocate. And I have spent the last several years researching and having podcast conversations on my podcast, The Empathy Edge, with leaders across industries, across function, about the fact that empathy is actually a strategic advantage and that leaders who embrace empathy can be stronger leaders, they can build thriving cultures, and then it can actually build winning brands as well. So that's what I'm all about. And I come from a brand strategy background, which was all about crafting brand stories that help people connect and engage to the right audience, which a huge ingredient of that was empathy.
And I loved that when we got the chance to meet, we both kind of straddled the world of like marketing and getting your business out there and what that strategy looks like, but also with all of these like human aspects of managing from within. So I think that's a really fun crossover.
Yeah.
So to get us started, I always like to start with something that kind of like lays the groundwork so that we're all
hmm
on the same page moving forward with the conversation. So
hmm
when we say empathy in the workplace,
Right.
what isn't, but is it, but also what isn't it?
I always love this question because I feel like one of the biggest parts of my mission is to debunk the myths of empathy. So there are a lot of different definitions out there. There's been definitions that have changed over time based on the more we find out about psychology and about how the brain works. But the definition that I use and the one which I use through for the lens of my work is that empathy is the ability to see, understand, and where appropriate, feel another person's perspective. And then to use that information to act with compassion. So there's a couple things to break down in there. One is that you don't necessarily have to feel what the other person is feeling. There's cognitive empathy, which is when we use our heads and imagine what something is like for someone. And then there's emotional empathy, where we actually do share the emotions. You get you're upset and agitated and my palms start to sweat, right? My heart starts to beat a little faster. But you can access empathy through either of those doors, which is very good for those of us who are neurodiverse or who maybe just are not necessarily touchy-feely people, right? It doesn't have to mean crying on the floor. And that information that you gather about someone's perspective and their context helps you take a next right step. And taking a next right step is what we call compassion. Now we're moved to act in some way. And that action could be just listening. The action could be a hug, if appropriate. The action could be, let me re-look at this strategy or this decision because now I have new information from you, right? And it can also just mean I communicate in a different way. I support you in a different way. Whatever that next action is, that's actually compassion. So, to answer what it's not, as I said, it's not crying on the floor with your employees, but it's also not just being nice. I think a lot of people confuse that and they say, oh, we do have an empathetic culture. Everyone's really nice. That doesn't mean they necessarily see other people's perspectives and actively listen and get curious. It just means they're really nice and they bake really good cookies and they bring them to work. It doesn't mean you cave into unreasonable demands. So when people say, well, I don't want to be empathetic at work because it means I'll be weak. No, you can actually make really tough business decisions and stand your ground, but do it in an empathetic and humane way. Bring people along with you or support them through the change. And then it also doesn't have to mean agreeing with someone. You can have an empathetic conversation to learn what someone's point of view is and their context. And you can walk away from that conversation saying, wow, I never thought of it that way. I still don't agree, but now I understand why that person feels the way they feel. And all of this is applicable in the workplace because we're humans interacting with humans. So we have to collaborate, we have to problem solve, we have to listen to new ideas, we have to make strategic decisions. And all of that involves some playing with other people. And so empathy absolutely has a place at work.
So I think I love that you like made the distinction between the emotional and the cognitive empathy, because I think
Absolutely.
like probably one of the things that you hear often is people being like, I don't have the emotional capacity to have empathy for
Hmm.
everything, which there, that distinction I think helps a lot with it.
Yeah.
But when we were talking, preparing for this conversation, you mentioned this idea too that a lot of times people will feel like if they're too empathetic, you mentioned it a little bit before, they're weak, but also that it's hard to manage too high performance if you are always working through this empathetic lens. So, how do
Yeah.
we balance the two of those?
Okay, I love this. And thank you for giving me a platform to once again share that empathy and high performance are not mutually exclusive. Empathy can actually lead to high performing teams. There's been research and data that shows that people that are on teams that have an empathetic leader or an empathetic culture, they're able to be more innovative, they're able to perform at a higher level, they're able to bring their creativity to work, they're more engaged, all of these things that actually lead to high performing teams. So it's not a either or, it's a both and. And so when we talk about being empathetic, the false narrative is that being empathetic means I don't hold people accountable and I don't hold them to a higher standard because I just need to be understanding of where everyone is. You it would be beneficial if you're understanding to where everyone is, but that doesn't mean you lower the bar. That means you work with people and get to know what's going on for them so you can help them rise to the occasion. You can help them rise to the level of excellence that you expect and hold them accountable for that. Or you end up finding a new role for them or counseling them out or upskilling them in some way. It does not mean that if I'm empathetic, I accept poor performance.
And I think that this goes hand in hand with the idea of like psychological safety.
Mhm.
Like if you're an empathetic leader, you're going to allow for people to make mistakes. That doesn't mean that like you continue to make the same mistake over and over again, but you can come at it and understand how the mistake happened and coach the person up. And that idea of psychological safety is such a key part to like
Yeah.
high performing teams. And I think it's
Yeah.
just a slight change in the language that we're using to discuss it.
It's so funny you say that because I just recently did a webinar with Minette Norman, who is an author and a speaker about inclusive leadership and psychological safety. She wrote the book, The Psychological Safety Handbook, which is a great read. And we talked about the fact that it's kind of the chicken or the egg conundrum of like if you create empathy, there have been research studies that show that employees will say if they are in an empathetic environment, I feel safe, I feel included, I feel like my voice matters, I feel like I can trust my boss, all of those things that create psychological safety. And also, if you can build psychological safety into your culture, that enables people to bring out their natural empathy, to say, like, it's safe here for me to be understanding. It's safe here for me to just have a positive conversation about poor performance rather than a negative one, right? And
Mhm.
so it's really about, one of the more common role plays I do in my leadership trainings is around delivering negative performance reviews, right? So the old school leadership paradigm, the one that's dying, I mean, you and I are kind of in that same camp of trying to beat that drum, right? Would say you shame and blame the person. But shaming and blaming never got anyone to better performance. It
Mhm.
just beat them down. So if you're practical as a leader and you say my goal is to get everyone to perform so we hit our numbers and I get my bonus. Let's say you're that callous, right? You're that kind of cold. Then you're not achieving your goal by blaming and shaming someone who's
No.
been not performing well. What you need to do is there needs to be a level of trust there and psychological safety, to your point, so they can tell you what's going on because you
Mhm.
want to get curious. What's going on for you, Emma? Like, why not Emma, but what's
Being
going
woo.
on? Like, how do you think things are going? And if there is psychological safety and you're modeling that as a leader, the person will actually tell you what's actually going on. Like
Mhm.
either it's something going on in their personal life, it's something or someone at work that's hindering their progress. It's perhaps a skill they don't have that you thought they had or that they pretended to have and now they're like, I actually don't really know how to do this."
Mhm.
Whatever the honest answer, it helps you get to the solution. Like, I say it like this because it's so crazy making to me of people that are like leading people and having these conversations that for purely selfish reasons are not helping them achieve their goals.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not even about, like I said, it's not even about just being nice. It's about, I'm here as a leader to help this organization grow. And you can't do that unless you can have constructive conversations that are honest, that are vulnerable, so that people will tell you what's actually going on.
Mhm. So when we're able to build this empathetic culture and we do the work on the inside of the company, what
Mhm.
are some of the results that we see outward facing, especially when we look at like some industries? Like I know we both have overlap in insurance and technology and insurtech and that area.
Yeah,
Both of those industries are going through a little bit of like an identity crisis
for
and,
sure.
for lack of a better term, like PR crisis.
Yeah.
How does building empathy from within help
Mhm.
solve some of those problems?
What a great question. And for sure my work when when I was working purely as a brand strategist and a marketing executive, the key to all of that is empathy. But the key to that is also authenticity, to making your marketing work, to making your brand be like a connective, engaged brand. But that's got to start from the inside out, because I would always tell my clients, brand and culture are two sides of the same coin. If you don't believe that, then you're just going to paint this veneer on your brand, and it's not going to be believable. It's not going to stick. It's not going to be sustainable. As soon as the transparency comes out, people are going to realize you're not actually walking your talk. So, in order to do that, if you are trying to build a connective, empathetic brand that's in touch with their customers and clients, it doesn't even have to be that you're like a noble social enterprise, or are doing anything that's you're not green, you're not whatever you do, you all want to connect and engage with your customers, with your ideal customers. And so to do that, you've got to make sure that the inside matches what's going on the outside, so that people will believe what's happening. And that starts with what's going on in your own is your own house in order, right? And we're probably going to get back to this analogy too when it comes to you as an individual, but you as a company, are you creating an environment where people can collaborate, they can do their best work, they can innovate, they can creatively problem solve? All of the things I just said are made possible through empathetic leadership and empathetic culture. So, stands to reason that when you create that culture and environment, your people deliver, and they deliver to your external customers and clients. So, you talked about finance, you talked about insurance. These are industries that impact people deeply and personally, and with great with great consequences, right? When we're talking about insurance, when we're talking about life insurance or auto insurance or home insurance, usually it's activated when things go wrong, right? So you are hitting people at their most vulnerable. And if you have burnt out, fear-driven, uh non-creative, not innovative people working in your company because of the culture you've created, what kind of customer experience are you giving? They will have
Mhm.
nothing left to give your customers and your clients. And that's how you get the horror stories, right? That's how you get the bad PR. That's how you get the one person that had the bad day and interacted with a client at that client's most vulnerable moment, and it all just blows up, right? So it stands to reason that every company should be interested in creating an empathetic culture, but especially companies that are dealing with customers and clients at their most vulnerable moments. Like, there's got to be an extra sensitivity to that, because we're talking about things that are really important, really personal to people. And whether it's financial planning, whether it's, like I said, life insurance or fire insurance, that ability to connect and engage with your clients and customers through empathy is a direct reflection of how that employee is treated by their employer.
Mhm.
There's a famous quote from Herb Kelleher, who was the founder of Southwest Airlines. And I don't know if it's the exact quote, but I'm paraphrasing. Happy employees mean happy customers. And beyond happy, we want our employees to understand our customers and almost understand them so well that we can predict their needs even before they might be able to articulate them. That's the mark of a power brand. That's the mark of a company that can withstand recessions, can withstand inflation, can withstand a lot because their personal identities will be so enmeshed with that company. I don't know if I shared this story with you, but it could be an interesting one for your
Mhm.
listeners. Many, many years ago, like a few decades ago, I was in a management training program for high potential women. And one of the women, we were talking about, creating magical experiences. How do leaders create like kind of magical experiences within their own employee base, but also so that that's reflected out to the customer? And one woman shared that until she dies, she will be loyal to American Express. And the reason is when her husband passed away, she had to call and cancel his credit cards. And anyone who's had to do that knows that that's a very hard thing to do.
Mhm.
It just feels terrible. And so she called American Express and she got an employee and she explained the situation. I need to close my husband's accounts. He's passed away. And the agent stayed on the phone with her probably for like a half an hour and just listened and just talked and just expressed his sympathy to her and just really treated her as a human being. Now, the ability to do that comes from an environment where you're not judging your employees by how many calls they crank through every
Mhm.
hour, right? It comes from policy decisions. You're not graded, you're not assessed based on how many problems you solved. You're assessed based on the experience you give to each customer. And that was such a profound experience for her. She ended up crying with the person. Like, I think that person I can't remember the story in detail right now, but I think that person ended up talking about some loss he had experienced. And because of that 30 minutes, they gained a lifetime customer and
Mhm.
someone who evangelized this story to everybody she knew. So that's the power of um, and that doesn't come from just hiring nice people. That comes from creating policies and reward structures and compensation plans that reward the right things, that reward empathy and collaboration and values and all of that. That's the link. That you
Mhm.
can't just hire your way to a culture like that by just hiring nice people. You can put really nice people or even really empathetic people in a horrible environment and it's going to knock it out of them. So
Yeah.
you need to create the environment to support and let that empathy flourish so that that's the experience that they give to customers.
And, while you're talking through this and you were talking specifically about that brand story, I have at least 5 different things that I can think of that are happening, including with Southwest right now, that
Uh-huh.
show
I know.
corporate decision making that lacks empathy
Yeah.
specifically for the customer.
Yeah.
Now, it ranges in variety of like how severe those slights are, but
Mhm.
especially right now in the day and age of like social media, all it takes is for one really bad experience to go viral.
Yeah.
And so, like, the importance and the stakes behind building this culture of empathy are even
Mhm.
higher than they've ever been before. There's a
Mhm.
brand right now who is the creator of like a specific bassinet for babies that is like, it's called the snoo and it like rocks babies to sleep.
Uh-huh.
And they had an influencer relationship with somebody that they sent a free, and they're expensive. They're upwards of $1,000.
Mhm.
They sent a free unit to an influencer to create content. She lost her child and they asked for it back.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so like they as an organization are like I mean, I would be surprised if they make it out of this based off of like
Wow.
and it wasn't one email. It was like a email train that
It
got
must have been
sent out to the internet.
systematized or something
Yeah.
and yeah,
No,
and
I mean,
just
there was
yeah.
emails traded back and forth where
Oh,
somebody doubled down
wow.
on this decision and, or Southwest with the free baggage claim going away and these
I
things that they just
know.
even the way that they communicated it
Yeah.
shows a lack of understanding of who the customer is on the other end.
Yeah.
And when I see this stuff, it usually comes across my way from TikTok and I'll go off and I'll talk to my husband. I'll be like, how don't brands get this yet? Going
Yeah.
back to your comment earlier about
Yeah.
individual leaders not understanding it,
Yeah.
as a brand, if you don't do this, it's
Yeah.
only a matter of time before you get canceled. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to have that empathy behind you, caring
Right.
about your employees so that they can care about your customers, or you're gonna end
Right.
up in a bad spot.
For sure. And I think, again, that gets back to something very practical and tangible that's not a soft skill. It's what are the policies and practices and habits and reward structures and compensation plans within our company that reward empathy, that reward collaboration, that reward all the things that we want, and what's getting in the way, right? To that
Mhm,
point, like if that is a policy, that is a policy they have around returns, right? Whatever it is, that's just horrific. I had not heard that story. Um, then you have to have a set of eyes on that says there's
mhm,
got to be exceptions to this rule, and we have to make an informed choice when we're doing things and recognize the humanity behind that. And to
mhm.
your point, recognize the damage it can do
Yeah.
for, how much are they paying in crisis PR? I bet they're
Oh, I
paying
can't
more than
even
the price of a crib,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Some things are just a sunk cost. It's funny because that you say this, because many years ago I wrote a book called Branding Basics for Small Business. And I talked about the fact that we can't create policies. And this was even back then. There must have been like inklings of me researching and writing about empathy. But, empathy is such a part of branding and marketing success
Mhm,
anyway. But I said, we can't create blanket policies that are meant to punish the few, but that actually punish the many, right?
mhm.
We've got to be able to look at, if you look at like liberal return policies, for example, will some people abuse that and like wear a dress to an event and then return it? Maybe, not a lot, but
Mhm.
maybe. Chalk that up to a cost of doing business, the cost of the actual empathetic policy being far more valuable to you in the long run than
Mhm.
a few returned dresses.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I
You look at
mean?
someone like Costco.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally,
Well,
totally.
I have a
So, yeah.
feeling we could keep going on
I
for
know,
a very
sorry, I
long
totally
time.
derailed us
No,
with that
you're
story,
fine.
sorry. But
But I really appreciate you taking the time to join me for the conversation, and for everybody who
yeah.
is joining, listening, and watching. I wanna also give you the opportunity to talk about those 2 books that are over your shoulder real
Oh,
quickly before we
yes.
part ways.
Great. Yeah. Well, so I've written a few books, but my last two books have been about researching empathy and the power of empathy to achieve radical success for cultures and for brands. And the most recent book is The Empathy Dilemma. It came out last fall, and the subtitle is How Successful Leaders Balance Performance, People, and Personal Boundaries. Because that's really the struggle that leaders are having right now. To your first question, which is how they're thinking it's an either or, and it's
Mhm.
really a both and. If we can make sure that what I have on here, 5 pillars, are really strong, and 2 of those pillars are really internal work you have to do as a leader: self-awareness and self-care. But it's really about looking at if you're challenged, if you're burning out, if quality is slipping, but you're still trying to be a very people-focused leader, you can look to those pillars to see that as a framework and say, well, am I weak in one of these areas? Do I need to strengthen one of these areas for myself or my team? Because if you have all of those equally strong, it will support you being able to balance that load of both performance and people. So it's been resonating quite well with leaders and groups, and then I do workshops and talks around that topic.
Great. Well, thank you again for joining me, and for everybody for watching, and have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.